Welcome back to Transmission on Bent TV. I'm Sammy Cameron, and today we're talking about sex and sexual health. Now that I have your attention, joining me today are Andrew, Mish and Nate. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So let's just start by saying that cisgendered people are those that aren't trans. We might use that word every so often. So how is sex different for trans people from cisgendered people?
I don't think it is all that incredibly different. Like, there's issues to think about in terms of different bodies, different experiences, but I think, you know, the same guidelines of consent and talking things through apply the same.
I think it's different between, I suppose it's similar, that sort of negotiation and all that sort of stuff, which would happen sort of with anybody, but it's, I think there's a bit, it is slightly different in terms of if you're out and about and you're hooking up randomly and those sorts of things. There's a lot more sort of discussion that you might not necessarily have with someone who you've met for 10 minutes otherwise. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's the point of disclosure, perhaps at some particular point in time during the pre-mating proceedings that you need to give some thought about. Do cis people run away when they find out that someone's trans?
There have been incidences. I think every trans person would have one or two stories to relate where they were getting on well with someone and then couldn't take the next step because those person just left. That certainly does happen.
And how much difficulty does this fear of rejection due to your trans status add to the situation of seeking out sex and relationships?
I think it can be quite debilitating for some people, and it's quite terrifying to have to out yourself to a complete stranger. But personally, I don't find it particularly hard. Yeah.
I mean, I think it can be, and I think it comes down to sort of how you're feeling. So if it's a night that you're feeling good and, you know, you're looking fabulous, you're dancing, all those sort of things, then if you're a bit more confident and you talk to someone and you tell them, and if they was to say, no, oh, look, not my thing, then that's fine. But if you're maybe feeling a little bit down on yourself, then it's going to impact you a bit more, like anything, I suppose.
It's probably the day to skip it anyway, Nate.
Wow. Well, I pick you up, like, really.
Oh, no.
This isn't a dating segment, okay? So is communication the key? And you highlighted communication can actually be difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
That fear of having to out yourself to somebody.
I think lots of people find communication in sex, anyone really can find it quite difficult because we live in a society where, you know, sex isn't something we talk about as openly or freely as maybe we should. And I think, you know, talking in really obvious ways and really, I suppose, being indiscreet about sex is something that's frowned upon. Yeah.
Perhaps we need to be a bit more explicit when we're close to somebody. How do you feel about potential partners that are specifically very interested in trans people? Do you feel fetishized and perhaps not being seen as a real human being?
I suppose it's that line, like, in terms of, like, is it a fetish or is it just someone into that? So, like, you know, you could say that I'm into, you know, guys that look like this, or I'm into women that look like this. I'm into trans people. Like, I kind of, like, there's, like, a taste, like an interest and all that sort of stuff, and then there's something that's more than that?
So,
I don't know.
To what extent it's an obsession is a grey sort of graph somewhere along the line.
There is a legitimate sexual attraction to trans people, and I think it's time that the world realise that. And that from both the male and female side. There are people genuinely sexually attracted to trans people. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
What about physical safety risks related to sex for trans people? I guess that could manifest itself in a number of different ways, I suppose.
Yeah, I was actually reading a really good article this morning about that. How about at that point of disclosure, if someone hasn't read you as trans before that, that can be a real serious place for violence to occur, particularly for trans women disclosing to heterosexual men, because then they can perceive that that's their heterosexuality under threat.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen terrible examples of that over the years.
I think with that, it's in terms of being safety, is that there's risk of safety when you're going to start having sex with anybody, regardless of your trans status. And something that I think is important is to make sure that you're aware of that. So if you are sort of going to disclose, do it in somewhere that's like a public place or something like that. That's and limiting the risk that you are putting yourself in is always important.
What about for a trans sex worker? Is that safety risk any different?
I think trans sex workers work in a range of different settings and places, and so it's really hard to generalise about trans sex work as an overall term. But, the issues of disclosure might not actually be as relevant for trans sex workers that are working, in a trans parlour or advertise as trans, but there are also trans people who work stealth. And so, it really depends how the particular worker's working.
So are trans people more likely to have sex with other trans people? Or is it just a matter of patiently looking till you find the right open-minded person or people? Is that awkward for you guys to answer?
Personally, that's very true for me, that, I do hook up with a lot of other trans people, and I find that that's really good for sex because there is that kind of, shared understanding about disclosure in different bodies. But, you can't generalise that to all trans people. And, I've had some shitty sex situations with trans people. But, that's definitely a result of the communities I move in. Yeah.
And what about sexual health issues? Are they any different for trans people than cisgendered people?
I'd say that back to the previous question, that yes, you can get yourself as a trans person into situations in sex that you didn't intend to be in when you first started the sexual encounter. And I suppose that's true of everyone. But I do feel that trans people are somewhat less inclined to be intimate as often as they would like, possibly, and desperate to keep that situation going when it is happening, so can say yes to doing things they never intended to do. And then you've got the added thing of, do they then feel comfortable going to their doctor or their health professional to have a check? And there's been a lot of situations where we know that trans people just do not source the healthcare that they should be getting, especially for sexual health. But really, really pleased to say we were at the World AIDS Conference last week, and that the guys from Pronto came up and asked for community consultation on how to improve their quick screening for HIV, for instance. And that, of course, Swanson Street are good too on that regarding dealing with trans people.
So sexually transmitted infections are something that we really should just be as aware of, if not more so, I suppose, for trans people. So I guess the point is that sexual health, you should really consult a doctor on a regular basis to make sure that things are okay. So I'd like to thank Andrew, Mish and Nate for joining us today. I'm Sammy Cameron on Transmission for Bent TV. I look forward to seeing you next time.